Hello, scientists. Today we're going to talk about marine ecosystems. Last time we talked about freshwater ecosystems. So the difference is saltwater. Marine ecosystems all contain saltwater, and these ecosystems are found around the world's oceans. So let's get started with coastal wetlands. So coastal wetlands are areas that are covered by saltwater for all or part of the time. So similar to freshwater wetlands. Coastal wetlands have periods of drought and then periods of high water content, but this is going to be saltwater content when they have water in them. They provide habitat and nesting areas for many fish and wildlife, just like the freshwater wetlands. They absorb extra rain, which protects areas from flooding. They also filter out pollutants and sediments and provide recreational areas. So they provide areas for fishing and boating and any of those recreational areas that occur near a ocean site. So they're very similar to our freshwater wetlands. The one difference is these are going to be saltwater wetlands, and they're going to be located in coastal regions. So estuaries. So many coastal wetlands form estuaries. And so these are where freshwater and saltwater are going to meet. So often a river kind of meets here before it gets to the ocean. And so it causes this brackish water or this mixture of fresh and salt water. So as the two bodies meet, currents form and cause mineral-rich mud and dissolved nutrients to fall to the bottom. So as the river is flowing, it's also bringing nutrients in to these estuaries. And so it provides a really good ground for nutrients and breeding and these things. So these nutrients become available to an abundance of plants and animal life. They're constantly receiving fresh nutrients because the river is flowing. They also have an abundance of sunlight. It's generally pretty shallow, and protection from ocean's harsh waves. So it's a good spot for ecosystems to come together, for these different organisms to breed and raise their babies in these estuary areas. But it's also a great place for other organisms to come and eat these babies or these other organisms that are coming to estuaries. So there are a lot of threats to these estuaries. Some of the threats are urban growth. So of the 10 largest urban areas in the world, 6 are built on estuaries. So Tokyo, New York, Shanghai, Buenos Aires, Rio de Janeiro, and Bombay. These are all large urban areas that are built near estuaries, basically. So a lot of the threats to these lands are obviously sewage problems, runoff of agriculture, runoff of fertilizers, which cause these algae plumes. You can kind of see some algae plumes here. And then trash. Trash buildup is also a threat to these estuaries. So salt marshes, these are also kind of inland marine ecosystems. These are estuaries where rivers deposit their load of mineral-rich mud. These marshes often act as nurseries in which many species of shrimp, crab, and fish find protection when they are small. So they are able to come and have their babies here, but then again, larger organisms are able to come and feed on these populations. So again, they absorb pollutants as well. So mangrove swamps, you can kind of remember these different areas as we go through them from our vocabulary video. But mangroves are basically several species of small trees where their root systems are kind of above ground and shallow in the water system. They're found in tropical and subtropical zones, so lining the equator, as we learned in our previous unit. They help to protect the coastline from erosion and reduce damage from storms. They provide habitat for about 2,000 animal species, so they're great habitat zones. If you can see these intricate root systems and provide great hiding grounds for these animals. And mangrove swamps have been filled with waste or used to development projects in many parts of the world. So again, they are in danger of us. and our development. So coral reefs, many of us have seen these pictures of these beautiful coral reefs, and they are slowly disappearing because of our influence on these reefs. But these are basically limestone ridges built by tiny coral. So what they do is we have these algae, and they build these coral to surround them, and then they can produce inside of these coral and live inside of these coral, and then they can catch their prey on the outside of these coral. So they build. They are basically building around the coral reefs. So you'll see them on the outskirts of these coral reefs. These coral polyps secrete skeletons of limestone, which form coral reefs over time. So these are years and years and years of building these reefs, and they are great grounds for many, many organisms. They're one of the most diverse ecosystems on Earth. They contain thousands of plant and animal species, and they must be in warm saltwater. They're pretty finicky about their surroundings, so if their surroundings are going to change, then they're either going to move off somewhere else or they're going to die. So this is where we have coral bleaching comes in. So coral bleaching happens when the pH gets off, so that means we're polluting the area, or global warming is causing the area to warm. And so these algae blooms basically will disappear, and they'll go somewhere else, or they'll die off. And so this causes coral bleaching, which means it's basically the dying off of coral, and it turns these coral white. But they must live in warm salt water where photosynthesis can occur. Photosynthesis is really important in these ecosystems, so they're pretty shallow. Only the outer layer of a reef contains living corals. And corals are predators, actually, and they sting their prey as they enter into the reefs by either floating or swimming by close to the reef. So we talked a little bit about the dangers of coral. So you can see here, this is a living coral here, and then this is after bleaching occurs. So it turns white, and the algae have dissipated or died or gone off to a different area. But they are very fragile. Temperature, pollution, nutrients must all remain stable for a coral reef to survive. So coral reefs bleach by turning white as a result of the algae inside of them dying or fleeing. About 50% of the world's coral reefs are now in danger of destruction. So we're seeing this bleaching happening, and we're trying to figure out how to stop this destruction of our coral reefs. So global warming, again, oil spills, pollution, runoff are all contributors to the dying off of coral reefs. Okay, so oceans. We have vast ocean ecosystems. Most of the ocean's life is actually concentrated in the shallow coastal waters, in these reefs or these marshes or these bogs, estuaries. This is where most of life occurs, and that's because there's an abundance of sunlight, and so there's abundance of nutrients as well. So sunlight can penetrate to the bottom here, and nutrients are running off from streams and rivers into these places and settling into the bottom of these estuaries or these shallow waters. Deep ocean systems contain organisms or animals that have adapted to no sunlight. So the deeper you get into the ocean ecosystem, the less sunlight there is until there's absolutely no sunlight. So there's no availability for photosynthesis. But they have created these fascinating adaptations. So some of them survive with bioluminescence, and they can attract their prey with these glowing lights that they have chemical reactions inside their body. Some of them just wait until organisms die and sink down to the bottom. It's a really amazing ecosystem. It's just there's not an abundance of ecosystem because it's such harsh environment to live. So they have to be able to survive no sunlight, very, very high pressure, and low temperatures. So plants and animals of the ocean. There are still plants and animals in the deep ocean. So the open ocean is one of the least productive of all ecosystems. Like we said, they don't have an abundance of organisms, but they still do have fascinating array of these organisms. So like I said, some of them use bioluminescence. You can see this organism here is glowing. This anglerfish has a little angler up here, and it pulsates bioluminescence, which is just a chemical reaction that's occurring in this angler, and it tracks prey. And then we have this glowing shark here that glows under certain types of lights. So the smallest herbivores are the zooplankton, which feed on the phytoplankton. So the difference here is the zooplankton are going to be these small herbivores, whereas the phytoplankton are going to photosynthesize. So these include jellyfish, tiny shrimp, and the larvae of fish, lobsters, and oysters. Fish and marine mammals feed on plankton. And again, those you're not going to find in the deep ocean because you're not going to find phytoplankton in the deep ocean because it can't photosynthesize. Decomposers, filter feeders, and the organisms that eat them live in the deep ocean area. So remember, they can't get their energy from the sunlight. So they're mostly going to be decomposers and anything that eats these decomposers. So they're going to either be decomposers or scavengers, basically. The decomposers are going to wait for food to sink to the bottom, and then they're going to eat that food. And then you have larger organisms that are going to eat them. So threats to our ocean. There are a lot of threats to our ocean. I think we know some of those threats, but pollution, mostly from what we're doing on land, is the biggest threat to the ocean. So this can be runoff of fertilizers, and we've talked a lot about the eutrophication and the causing of algae plumes to build up and kind of suffocate other animals. Waste from cities, industries, fertilizers, and sewage run off the land. Overfishing is a big problem. We have these immense nets, these huge nets that weigh thousands of pounds, and we can't get them up, but animals get stuck in them. And there are some, mammals in the ocean that have to come up to breed, and they're not able to come up to breathe either. Or there's these other animals that just get stuck in these nets and they die. So marine mammals can drown in these nets. Other organisms can die in these nets. And ships like to discard their nets when they're no longer usable, and so they'll kind of sink in the ocean, and animals will get trapped into these nets. So what about the Arctic and Antarctic ecosystem? These are actually classified as marine ecosystem because an abundance of their food source comes from these oceans. So they might not all be they might not all live in the ocean, but they get their food sources from the ocean. So we're going to label them a marine ecosystems. They're rich in nutrients from the surrounding land masses. They support large populations of plankton, which feed a large variety of fish. And then the fish are food for other land animals, ocean birds, whales, seals, penguins, things like that. So Antarctic is the only continent never colonized by humans. Plankton also forms the basic of the Antarctic food web, and then it nourishes a large number of fish, whales, and birds. So here we have an Arctic fox here. We have a polar bear. We have some sea lions and a narwhal. These are all Arctic and Antarctic animals. Okay, so that's all I have for the marine ecosystem. Remember, you can always go back and watch these videos again. Remember to take your notes on your outline. And thanks for watching.